¿Y en América me exhibieron encadenado?
Sí.
¿Soy la historia del negro en América?
No.
Entonces soy King Kong.
Hello and welcome to episode 663 of the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is Monster Kid Radio. My name is Derek M. Cook. I'm your writer, host, producer, but I'm not your musician. Your musician this week is Billy Vanino. We had him on the show a couple weeks back and I loved his EP Revolver so much. We're dipping back into it for this week's song, which is called King Kong. You can find this over at billyvaninomx.bandcamp.com. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes, and you'll, of course, hear this song in its entirety at the end of this episode. Big thanks to Billy Vanino for letting us play his music here on the show. So I had grand plans for at least the last 2 weeks of May, Lucha da Mayo, that sort of thing. Gonna do luchador movies, and then we ended up breaking things up a little bit. We took a break for 2 weeks. We wanted to honor the passing of Roger Corman, which we did for the past 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, we had the listeners send in their thoughts about Roger Corman, and then last week, my longtime friend Matthew Rashleigh joined us to talk about Roger Corman as well. And well, Matt's coming back this week because we're going to wrap up what should have been the last week of May's episode, Lucha da Mayo, where we talk about luchador movies. We love luchador movies here at Monster Kid Radio, especially the ones with monsters in them. You know who had never seen a luchador movie before this year's Lucha da Mayo? That would have been Matt. Well, Matt has made up for lost ground, and he mainlined a number of luchador movies. He and I are going to talk about that journey for him, what he found about these movies. Did he like them? Well, I think the fact that he watched more than one or two will tell you that yes, he really did like them. What did he like about them, though? What did he find to love in these luchador movies? And will he continue watching luchador movies now that Lucha da Mayo is in our rearview mirror until next year, where we will come back and talk about luchador movies again in a little bit more of an organized fashion. So that's what you're going to get this week, is you're going to hear me and Matt chatting about his journey into luchador movies. It's going to be fun. I had fun editing the conversation. I had a lot of fun having the conversation. I hope you have fun listening to the conversation here in a little bit.
Have something you'd like to share with Monster Kid Radio? You can email the podcast at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 360-524-2484. Here's some listener feedback now.
Hey Derek, hey group, Captain Billy here. Leave it to Captain Billy to come late to the Roger Corman tribute party. I just changed jobs, so I'm still getting acclimated, and I was way behind on my podcast. And then it took me a little while to find the stuff I wanted to tell everyone to watch. So if you go to your Google box, it's on YouTube. The American Cinematheque did a tribute to Roger Corman last November. And it took me forever to find it because I watched it back in February and I could not remember who did it. Thought it was the AFI. It took me forever to find it. But if you type American Cinematheque into your Google box, Hail to the King, a celebration of Roger Corman. Hail to the King, a celebration of Roger Corman. It was about an hour long. I believe they showed Eat My Dust somewhere in California. I'm not sure where they do it. Of course, Roger Corman was there after the movie. Ron Howard was there, Joe Dante, Mick Garris, and Alan Arkbush, and I think a couple other people. And yeah, I talked about Roger and everything he did for about an hour or so, and I think it might have been Roger's last public appearance, or definitely his last public tribute like that. The other thing I wanted to report on that I didn't hear anybody talk about, unless it was on, I haven't listened to the second part of the tribute yet, so maybe I missed it, but I know Derek's been putting links up. Shout Factory TV. This was a few years ago, it's maybe 10 years ago or so, but they did a series of interviews, I think there's 13 episodes, they run about 30 to 45 minutes each. It is called Cult-tastic, C-U-L-T-Tastic, Cult-tastic, Tales from the Trenches with Roger and Julie Corman. So they interview Roger and Julie, and they talk about 13 episodes. I think they talk about maybe 20 or so, because they don't talk about just one per episode. So maybe 20 movies they cover or so, maybe more. But they're on Shout Factory TV. If you go directly to their website, you can just watch them all for free. So, and that was really good too, because you get a little bit more in depth into all the movies they talk about. And then personal memories of Roger Corman. I think the first Roger Corman movie I ever saw was probably Little Shop of Horrors. Houlihan and Big Chuck used to show that in Cleveland about, I don't know, every 3 weeks or so, it seemed like. And it was the one my mother didn't like because it was gross. And my mother was cool with monsters, and my mother was cool with murders, but she couldn't handle gross. And the only thing I can think of that would be the gross part would be where Seymour feeding the hand to Audrey Jr., and a little piece of the hand falls off into Audrey before the rest of the hand goes in. So I think the feeding of body parts is what my mother didn't care for. But and I remember watching that as a movie, and I remember thinking, this is not a normal, like, it seemed like there were parts that were funny, and I don't remember any monster movie clearly that was supposed to be funny. I mean, maybe there were funny parts of Bride of Frankenstein, and they hadn't started showing the Abbott and Costello movies yet. I think this was the early 70s. Abbott and Costello showed up on Superhost in the later 70s, so... Yeah, so I thought there was something unusual about it, and of course now, I mean, you talk about that movie or the remake or the musical and all that stuff, and I'm like, oh no, go watch it it's an hour long. For a movie that's an hour long, it gets a little draggy, like 2/3 of the way through, but you get through those scenes real fast. And the chase scenes at the end that were outside, I think those go on a little too long, but I mean, other than that, I mean, talk about a near perfect movie. I mean, in and out. I wish to God, like, every movie was an hour long now. I just saw the new Mad Max, and it's a great movie, but man, 2.5 hours, and that last Batman movie was 3 hours. Like, could we just breath of entertainment? So, my favorite movie right now, and has nothing to do with monsters or kids or radio. Well, radio. My favorite movie currently, for the last 40 years, that Roger Corman had anything to do with was Rock and Roll High School. Alan Artbush is the director. Oh, that's what I wanted to talk about. If you're not listening to Joe Dante's podcast, The Movies That Made Me, from the Trailers from Hell website, yeah, you need to go back and look through that. Alan Artbush is the director of Rock and Roll High School. He and Joe Dante, the director of Gremlins, were I mean, I assume if you're in this, you know, but maybe you don't. Not everybody knows. These two were the guys who were making trailers in-house for Roger Corman back in the early 70s. Up until 71 or 72, Roger used to have all his trailers done out of house. I hate to say the word outhouse, but yeah, and somebody suggested to him that he have them done in-house. It would be faster and easier, and he would have more control over them. So yeah, Joe Dante and Alan were like fresh out of movie school, and yeah, they got hired. So, and it's just a coincidence. Maybe a few days before Roger passed, I think that was April 9th, or maybe on April 3rd, 4th, 5th. If you go back on Joe Dante's podcast on the screen, you'll find where Alan and him, they talk about editing the trailer. They've gotten, it was an hour-long talk with both of them, and they talk about, editing trailers for Roger and all. I mean, they got to do Fellini movies and Ingmar Bergman movies, because Roger was buying foreign films and bringing them to America, places, these movies, because he could sell them in certain markets good, and like I said, just coincidentally, right before Roger passed. So, yeah, go back and look that up. Back to Alan Artbush, yeah, Rock and Roll High School. Talk about a movie you can watch over and over and over again. I knew of this movie because I was an early purchaser of cult movies by Danny Perry. If you haven't read cult movies of Danny Perry, you don't know what you're missing. Poke around on the internet. Danny Perry wrote 3 books through the 80s. Cult movies, 1, 2, and 3. Essential reading if you're into movies in general. He covers all kinds of things in there. So yeah, I think that's when I first heard of the film. And then eventually my local video store got it on VHS, and that's where I saw it, and that's where I fell in love, and that's what made Captain Billy a punk rocker. Well, I hate the word punk rocker, but I got to see the Ramones 4 times. That's like, if I think back to all my concert days, that's my proudest thing, is I got to go see the Ramones so many times back in my youth. Yeah, and you haven't seen Rock and Roll High School. I mean, yeah, there's a possibility. Not everything has got giant crab monsters in it. Well, Alan made a follow-up movie called Get Crazy, which just came out finally on Blu-ray 2 years ago. And I watched the commentary for Get Crazy. The reason it hadn't come out earlier is because they lost the negative. No one knew where the negative was. It just disappeared. The movie wasn't a hit, and Roger financed it. I forget what company it was in the mid-'80s there. The negative was gone. And eventually they had to find a 35mm print of it and clean it up real good, and that's what came out, and I don't know the company who put it out. But you can watch the VHS copy of it for free. Get crazy. You can watch that for free on YouTube. So it's got Malcolm McDowell and Lou Reed, your favorite actors. So, and gosh, what other Roger Corman memories do I have? Yeah, I mean, we all loved Roger, didn't we? That's why we're all here, kinda. I mean, kids, we're all gonna miss him. But look, at least Roger got to live long enough to be properly celebrated. He got an Academy Award. I don't know if everybody mentioned that. He got an Academy Award. I know the Academy had to be browbeaten into giving Ray Harryhausen an Academy Award. I don't know if the same was true for Roger. Guillermo del Toro, I think, was spearheaded getting Ray his. I'm not sure if Ron Howard or Scorsese were spearheading Rogers or not, but I know for Ray, del Toro and a few other people had a problem. I mean, Tom Cruise gives Ray Harryhausen his Academy Award. You look it up on the internet. And, yeah, Roger was another one where they had to have, celebrities had to promise to be there in order for him to give Roger the award in the first place to show up on the broadcast. I'm rambling now, so Derek, great show as always. Keep up the good work. Thank you for all the work you do. Bye.
Thank you for calling in, Captain Billy. Now, listeners, the voicemail line does have a hard 3-minute limit, but Captain Billy, he calls in multiple times, and then I just stitch the voicemails together in editing. So if you ever want to call in, share your thoughts with the show, and you're worried about going over that 3-minute limit, just call back and I'll edit everything together later. It's no big deal. Anyway, Captain Billy, most of those links I did talk about over the last 2 weeks with either Matt or Robert Kelly from Record All Monsters, except I wasn't aware of the American Cinematheque link, so I'm going to make sure there's a link to that as well. It's a 51-minute celebration of Roger Corman. From 7 months ago, it was an event that took place on September 30th, 2023, moderated by Mick Garris. It looks like fun. I'll check it out, and I'll make sure there's a link for you to check it out in the show notes. Captain Billy, thank you for calling in. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. You know, at some point, I am going to sit down to watch Rock and Roll High School. Never done it. Don't tell Jeff Punk Rock Martin from the Joy Cinema that I've not seen it. That's like his favorite movie. That's one of the films that he has celebrated in the lobby of the movie theater itself with a one-sheet from the poster. And unlike a lot of the classic monster movie posters he has up, this is an original. I mean, he loves this movie. One of these days, I'll sit down and watch it. Tell you what, by the time we are finished with Lucha da Mayo next year, I will have watched it. I can make that commitment. It has nothing to do with luchador movies, but there it is. Anyway, thanks for calling in. I appreciate it. Let's go ahead and get on with the rest of the show. We've got Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review and Kenny's Famous Monsters of Filmland segment right now.
Como he acertado, tienen que terminarse la copa de un trago.
It is safe to state that the grandchildren of some of the people in this theater will not be born on Earth. They come from the bowels of hell, a transformed race of walking dead, zombies guided by a master plan for complete domination of the Earth. Plan 9 from outer space. Starring the most nightmarish cast ever, Bela Lugosi, the seductive Vampira, and Thor Johnson as the Walking Dead.
Turn off your electro gun! No! No! Stop it, Dennis!
I can't get it, it's jammed!
Stop it, you fool!
Bullets bounce off their bodies. Rockets, missiles, jets cannot stop their death ships. What earthly power can stop this terror? For a glimpse of things to come, see this blast of screen suspense. For it could be happening right now.
Suddenly, a man dies at the controls of a train. Suddenly, a car swerves to destruction. Suddenly, a plane dives to death. The Earth dies screaming. Suddenly, death descends on the four corners of the Earth, and only a handful of human beings survive to live in fear, powerless to combat an unknown terror.
Turn it off.
Who are you?
That away, I'm not the enemy.
I don't know who the enemy is.
The Earth dies screaming, and the robots take over. Starring Willard Parker, Virginia Field, Dennis Price,
You said that she was dead.
She was.
She was alive enough tonight, except her eyes.
Well, what was the matter with them?
She hasn't got any eyes.
Here is paralyzing suspense as the Earth dies screaming. Electrifying terror as the Earth dies screaming.
Jeff!
Peggy! Peggy!
The robots.
What? Peggy!
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Ultraman Ace, Episode 5, The Giant Ant Terrible Monster versus the Ultra Brothers. Young women are disappearing across Tokyo in nightmarish fashion. While going about their normal business, they're suddenly pulled underground by an unseen force. Tak is unsure that the vanishings fall under their jurisdiction until Minami is nearly swallowed by a vortex in the middle of a busy street. Fortunately, Hokuto springs into action and saves her, and they both witness the source of the attack, a giant ant below the Earth's surface. Tak scientists hypothesize that the monster is after girls with type O blood, and when giant ant Erabunta destroys a subway full of commuters, the team is dispatched. Captain Ryu sends for the drill tank Duckbill, in which he, Mikawa, and Kono directly confront Erabunta, but the kaiju disables the vehicle, leaving the Tak members with less than an hour of oxygen to spare. Hokuto hatches a plan to save his team and defeat the terrible monster, but for it to work, he must convince Minami to act as bait and be drawn into Erabunta's pit a second time. Will she risk it all for Tokyo and the terrible monster attacking crew? And what if Hokuto's plan contains a fatal flaw? Episode 5, which first aired on May 5th, 1972, is an excellent representation of the world-building Tsuburaya Productions was undertaking with Ultraman Ace. Episode 1 had established that Ace was one of the Ultra Brothers, a group consisting of First Ultraman, Zoffi, Ultra 7, and Ultraman Jack. Here it's revealed that the brothers can send a deep space SOS signal to one another, and when Zoffi responds, it's a significant moment, setting the precedent for Ultra Brothers fighting kaiju and aliens side by side on planet Earth. Speaking of kaiju, Erabunta the giant ant is one of the better-looking monster suits since the early episodes of Return of Ultraman, with mean insectoid features and a rapacious hunger to match. It's also firmly established at this point that Tak and the Ultra Brothers are facing one essential enemy, the interdimensional entity Yapul, who uses other aliens like Giran and terrible monsters to advance its invasion of Earth. Now, it's worth pointing out that a unified enemy was a major feature of 1971's hit TV series Kamen Rider, in which the masked hero took on the Shocker organization on a weekly basis. Coincidence or not, it speaks to the synergy of the second kaiju boom of the early 70s, truly a magical time to be a fan of transforming superheroes and giant monsters. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Behemoth, Goliath, King Kong escapes and meets his greatest foe, the Kong of Steel. A gargantuan duel unmatched by any battle in history. Thundering 60-foot robot Kong of Steel, creation of the evil Doctor Who, criminal genius who stops at nothing. Kong, once again, dig! King Kong shakes the earth. King Kong fights for life against the copter squadron. Thrills as King Kong battles the Serpent of Mondo Island.
No, it's Kong!
Hits himself against the nation's armament. And plunges a beautiful girl into a world of terror. King Kong in a duel to the death.
There are some doors that should never be opened. One of them is the door to the Shuttered Room.
I wouldn't take her into that old house, mister. Less than you want her to end up like this.
The terror begins on the road to the house with the Shuttered Room.
There's no hope for Susanna if she spends even one night in that house.
Why, detect a threat there somewhere?
Did you feel it?
Feel what?
When you opened that door, it was like I was standing in front of a refrigerator.
The terror is a touch, a sound, a sense of someone watching that stains two people with the secret of what lies in the Shuttered Room and beyond.
Please, let me go. I have to see my husband.
Well, what's wrong with staying right here and passing the time of day with me?
Hey, Chief. That sure is a lovely wife you got there. And, you know, I hear tell she's just as pretty all over. You wouldn't happen to know what your wife's doing right now, would you? Hey, maybe Ethan knows what this guy's wife's doing. Or maybe this guy's wife knows what Ethan is doing. Because maybe they're doing the same thing together.
Wait a minute. Let me help you.
Sleep one night in the house with the Shuttered Room. and you may never want to sleep again.
This is an encore presentation of the Famous Monster segment from May 9th, 2019. Hola, cabezones de Radio de los Niños Monstruos. Soy Kenny con un vistazo a monstruos famosos de la tierra del cine. The second part of Monsters from Mexico comes at the end of issue 122 in a 10-page article with 13 pictures. It begins with a synopsis of Dr. Satan from 1966, which featured zombies controlled by the title Doctor. Next comes a sequel, 1967's Dr. Satan and Black Magic. That is followed by a look at Autopsy of a Ghost, which imported John Carradine, Cameron Mitchell, and Basil Rathbone to appear with the man-child Chabelo. Chabelo is a famous Mexican TV personality who did a kids show advertising all types of junk food via silly games. Chabelo played the part of a squeaky-voiced boy well into his 80s, till he retired not too long ago. The film sounds crazy, as you can tell by its synopsis. In 1567, Canuto Perez committed suicide. His punishment was that he would not have eternal peace unless he finds a woman who falls in love with him and sacrifices her life. 400 years later, Satan generously provides him with 3 women, but he is rejected by each and every one of them, not because he was a ghost, but because they all have their own problems. The following day, all meet at the ghost house. Galena, a pretty woman who happens to be half insane, Susanna, a sassy and superstitious maid, Vitola, a female robot, Moleculo, a mad inventor, played by Cameron Mitchell, Satan himself, played by Basil Rathbone, and Chabelo, a spoiled child. A bank robber arrives to complicate matters, followed by an agent who calls himself 07½. The thief is also followed by a crooked mouthpiece and 2 cheaters who are looking for a sucker. An amnesiac heir steps in with the purpose of kidnapping the beautiful Galena. They all make fun of the devil, and in the midst of all the madness, there is only one sane woman, the Robotrix. She falls in love with and gives her life for the ghost at the very moment the inventor is performing a complicated algebraic autopsy of the ghost to disintegrate it. The atomic bomb of a Latin American country explodes by mistake. There is not time for further investigation, and immediately thereafter the USA, Russia, Israel, France, and Red China believe they are being attacked and use their own nuclear bombs. Everything turns back to normal. Madness. The article continues with Batwoman from 1967, which features this production comment. Batwoman was shot in Acapulco, Mexico. It stars Mara Monte, a shapely Italian-Mexican actress whose battles with the Fishman monster made as many as 8 changes of her bikini necessary in one day of arduous shooting. "1968's Lady Death follows, which also imported John Carradine. Next comes brief mention of House of Madness, Super Zan and the Space Boy, and Devil's Women from 1972. A Mexican Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde gets a full synopsis, The Man and the Beast from 1972. Next, Walt Lee introduces a look at luchador movies with this comment. Masked wrestlers are extremely popular in Mexico, and many of them appear in both the arena and as movie heroes. In the 1957 movie Body Snatcher, Wolf Ravenskys played a wrestler who was killed and brought back to life with the brain of a gorilla. In his new body, he had large stitches on his head, ape-like fangs, and was incredibly strong. Later, Wolf Ravenskys played the black masked wrestler Neutron in a series of films including Neutron Against the Death Robots, Neutron and the Black Mask, Neutron Battles the Karate Assassins, Neutron vs. the Maniac, Neutron vs. the Amazing Dr. Caronte, Neutron traps the invisible killers. About the same time Neutron got started, other masked wrestlers began appearing regularly in monster movies. Among the most popular are Santo, Blue Demon, and Mil Mascaras, 1,000 Masks. Other wrestlers who have appeared in horror adventure films are Angel, Blue Angel, Tinieblas, Darkness, Frankenstein, El Rayo de Jalisco, the Lightning of Jalisco, El Fantasma Blanco, the White Ghost, El Avispón Escarlata, the Scarlet Wasp. These wrestlers are somewhat like Batman in that, while they have no superpowers, their great strength, mental agility, and sheer daring give them the winning edge over even the most powerful supernatural creatures they might encounter. In many films, the wrestler appears in teams, as do the popular monsters. One group is called the Champions of Justice, and includes Blue Demon, Mil Mascaras, El Rayo de Jalisco, El Fantasma Blanco, El Avispón Escarlata. In one of their films, they battle a crazed scientist who turns rats into aggressive monsters by means of molecular transformation. The article concludes with a closer look at Neutron and Santo. A list of 28 Santo films is given. Monster Kids, we have a lot of work still. And Santo and Blue Demon vs. the Monsters is featured in a full synopsis. Hasta luego, amigos!
Trapped! Trapped! Trapped!
They're traps in a whirlpool of shrieking fear from the most fiendish idea ever conceived by the human brain.
The Brainiac!
And it has a friend. She was beautiful, desirable, and not altogether human.
The curse of the crying women.
Together they will trap you in a whirlpool of horror. But if you live through it, you will never forget.
The Brainiac and the curse of the crying women.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is an important message from Jack H. Harris, producer of 4D Man.
Imagine a check for $1 million being made out to you. In my new film, you will see 4D Man perform feats never seen on the screen before. And if you, any one of you listening to me, can actually perform in real life the feats ascribed to 4D Man, $1 million in cash will be yours. Your admission ticket to see 4D Man in widescreen and color may be worth $1 million.
4D Man is the most amazing motion picture ever made. The story of one man who solved the mystery of the fourth dimension. Even in this century of wonders, when science holds nothing to be impossible, you'll gasp in awe at the feats of the 4D Man.
In color to thrill you as never before, 4D Man.
This is Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned. And don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
All right, so I'm thinking that I'm the newbie to this. You're the experienced veteran to this. I kind of figured that would be the guide to the conversation.
Yeah.
Me, the enthusiastic, and you, the wise sage of the Lucha Libre.
Sure, I'm the Lucha Yoda.
You be the Lucha Yoda. One thing I was thinking about the 6 that I have seen is that it's cool in the sense that I've seen, the big 3, each of them in the lead.
That's true.
Which is cool.
And I think I want to start with that since it's already recording. Listeners, we are talking with a newbie. Well, I wonder what the Spanish word is for newbie. I don't speak Spanish. I can't even roll my R's. It's a birth defect. So I'm not even going to try, but we have Matthew Rashleigh back on the show, who is quickly becoming a Monster Kid Radio irregular. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I've had some surrealist, psychotronic movie adventures, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Surreal and psychotronic is a good way to talk about these movies. We're talking about luchador movies. You know, historically on Monster Kid Radio, when I have everything lined up and my act together, we spend all of May talking about luchador movies. We call it Lucha da Mayo. And, you know, I didn't have everything lined up just right, but, you know, I can't let the months go by without talking about luchador movies. Last week, we had Robert Kelly from Record All Monsters on to talk about a specific luchador film. This week, we have somebody who had never seen any of these movies up until recently, and I thought it'd be fun to explore these movies through the eyes of somebody who has never seen them before. Have you survived your experience so far, sir?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed, and I'm searching out more.
Excellent. I have so many here. I've had listeners send me the Santo box set that was released a couple of years ago, and that's been fun. But I also own so many others that I love to just pull out and kick back. They're comfort food for me. A couple of weeks ago, I had somebody on the show, Vincent Hannum, and we were talking about Jack Arnold films and that sort of thing. But at one point, he and I also spoke about how these monster movies, there's different subgenres that you can kind of get lost in that you might not be aware of, that you might not know about. And I feel like that's the experience that you're having right now. It's just this weird little subgenre in cult and genre cinema that up until recently you've just had no experience with, no knowledge of, that sort of thing. Did you even know this was such a deep well before?
Yeah, we've known each other since film school many decades ago. So, you know, I think we both are movie nerds to the 9th or 10th level.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of movies I know, but there's so many movies I don't. And my only knowledge of Lucha Libre films came from years ago, going to the Joy Cinema with my kids. And while we waited for the movie to start, Jeff Punk Rock Martin had a slideshow of Santo movie posters. And I was like, wow, are those real? Like, I've never seen those before. They're so wild. And I never had the chance to really look into it or dive into it beyond seeing those posters until talking to you about it. You lit up when I brought up, like, hey, I saw these crazy masked wrestler monster movie posters, like, and you're like, oh, Lucha Libre, you're in for a treat. And I have been. I just finally got around to it. And it's been a treat.
It's such a weird little subgenre that I wish was still going strong today. I wish there were still these kinds of movies being made because I'd be there every week watching the next one. I know that a couple of years ago, I say couple, but really time is a flat circle and I lose track of it and all that. Several years ago, Mil Mascaras did a handful of, I guess, modern luchador movies. Mil Mascaras versus the Aztec Mummy, that sort of thing. And I've even hosted one of those at the Joy Cinema. We showed the Mil Mascaras film, and I put on my luchador mask and my suit jacket and got up on stage and introduced the movie. I can tell you, sitting around for an hour and a half in a luchador mask is a little uncomfortable. They get pretty hot, pretty sweaty, pretty quick. I can't imagine shooting on set in Mexico with film lights, how comfortable these guys were. But man, just watching the movie wearing a luchador mask gave me even more respect for what they do.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's amazing that this whole, like you said, subgenre exists.
Mm-hmm.
And when you, at least for me, when I watch them, I'm like, why don't more people know these films? You know? I mean, people love superhero movies. They love comic books. Wrestling is huge. You know, B movies are huge. Sci-fi, classic monster flicks. And the amazing thing about Lucha Libre films is it's all of that wrapped up into one.
Yeah.
You think it's ripe for a comeback. And if not a comeback, at least kind of a resurgence of enjoying those classic films from the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
A rediscovery is
there you go.
Something that needs to happen for a lot of these. And I don't know if part of it is because the Mexican film industry kind of operated a little bit differently than how things were up here in the States. I don't know if film masters were kept the same way, if that material is even available anymore. I know there was some slight controversy. I didn't really get into it too much. I didn't mind when that one Santo box set came out and all they had were the English language dubs versus the original Spanish language with subtitles. I don't know if it's because things weren't kept or what. I also don't know if it's because it was wrestling based that it wasn't treated the same way. I just am not aware enough of the Mexican culture to speak to it with too much authority. But I think you're right. There's a lot out there. And I do know that a lot of times this kind of stuff would just be played in the afternoon on some channel down in Mexico, on a Saturday or Sunday. They just run a string of Santo movies or Blue Demon or Mil Mascaras, whatever they had on hand at the time. You also know that I'm a huge fan of pro wrestling. And I think you're right. Pro wrestling is kind of on an upswing right now. It kind of comes and goes in cycles in terms of like the pop culture and there being more wrestling options and outlets out there for people who are interested in pro wrestling. So with this media just kind of sitting there, do something with it, man. Put it out, restore it all. Let's do some prestige re-releases, get the boutique labels doing even more than what they're doing now with Blu-ray and DVD releases. There's over 50 Santo movies. He was certainly the most prolific, but even outside of Santo, you've got all the Blue Demon films. You've got the Mil Mascaras films, and those are just the big three. You have other luchadors as well that headlined their own movies. The material's there, and I hate to just reduce movies to content, but the content is there.
For sure, and it is interesting, and I need to do more research, but it seems like the rise of Lucha Libre films came after the golden age of Mexican cinema.
Yeah.
Like the golden age for Mexican cinema really started during World War II. America was totally engaged in fighting the World War on two fronts. Mexico hadn't entered the war. And their film industry kind of took advantage of the moment of Hollywood not making as many movies. And they really went out of their way to make a lot of classic cinema. After the war, it seems like in Mexico, just like the United States from what I've read, is in the 50s, TV became prolific. Everyone had a TV set. But at the same time, Hollywood studios are like, okay, well, we need to make bigger, grander pictures, wide format, 70 millimeter epics, things to bring people out of the house. And from what I've read, the Mexican filmmakers couldn't afford to buy into that equipment. And that was sort of the end of their golden era. But then you look at the Lucha Libre films and you think, well, what they couldn't do financially or technically, they made up for with these grand films that had something for everybody. When I watch them, I'm thinking this is a family event. You've got wrestling, you've got a little bit of romance, you've got monsters and all sorts of craziness for the kids to engage in. So maybe that was sort of their answer to dealing with television. Plus, you kind of have to think that there's also that tie-in of luchadors who are real-life superheroes. Families could go watch at the arena, watch Santo fight someone, go home, maybe see a little bit of him on TV, and then go to the movie theaters, and this luchador that you know is now fighting Martians, a Martian invasion, trying to save the world. The fact that you have this on so many levels is really kind of amazing. Like, you know, both of us, Americans, raised with Superman and comic books, all those superheroes had an alter identity, but they weren't real. Santo was Santo at the supermarket, and Santo was the superhero fighting Dracula. To me, as a kid, that would have been magical.
I agree, and I love the world that these films seem to inhabit where, yeah, they just walk around with their masks on. You know, maybe they're bare-chested, maybe they're wearing a mock turtleneck and a suit jacket, but this is normal. This is who they are. The mask literally is the identity of these people. And I love that world. I wish we lived in that world.
Right? What really surprised me wasn't Martians or monsters. It was seeing Santo sleeping in his mask.
Yeah.
Waking up as the phone rang.
Yeah.
And he's in his mask.
That's the one thing that I struggled with those Mil Mascaras movies that I mentioned a little bit ago, the more modern ones, is that There's one that ends with him about to have a love scene with the leading lady or the wrestling lady. And the very last shot is a close-up of the bed, and both of their masks are taken off and put on the bed. I'm like, dude, you're Mil Mascaras. You're the man of 1,000 masks. You're the man that wears a mask under your mask. You don't take your mask off for bedtime Olympics. What are you doing?
For sure. And I gotta say, that is one of the best physical special effects I've ever seen, is the way Mil Mascaras changes mask over mask over mask without showing his face.
Yeah.
Like, that's some technical skill.
I love the big three, but I've made it pretty clear on this show that of the three, Mil Mascaras is my favorite. I love them all. I love Mil, and I think part of the reason is because of that cool mask double flip thing that he does, where he takes the one off, puts the other one on, facing the camera, and you still don't see his face. And it's part of the reason why I love him so much.
And Mil is still with us from what I see online.
Mil is still with us.
Old, going to be 82 this summer. It's great to know that some of those wrestlers have a long life.
He's still with us. He was the youngest of the three. Santo, I believe, was the oldest of the big three, the three musketeers of luchadors, and Blue Demon there. Now, Santo and Blue Demon's children did go on to carry the legacy, which is pretty common in luchador and lucha libre culture, is to have a family of luchadors or wrestlers, passing the mask down or the name down, that sort of thing. So there was the son of Santo. There is Blue Demon Jr., who actually competed on Mexico's version of Dancing with the Stars in his mask. Kenny from the show, people know him. He does the Famous Monsters from Filmland segment. Kenny actually sent me a clip of that. And the judges are telling him, you're wearing your mask. We can't see your face, so we don't really feel the emotion that you're supposed to have as you're dancing. So he shows up one week, takes off his mask, but he's wearing like a half mask, the mask that he wears when he goes out to eat, so his mouth is available. So see, he's like, I just don't take the mask off. I just don't. This is who I am. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
The 6 movies that you watched, you sent me a list. Santo and Blue Demon versus the Monsters, and I think that's the one you started with, wasn't it?
It was. It was the first one. What a place to begin, right?
Oh, man, yeah. And honestly, I think that might have been the first one I saw, too.
Nice.
And then Santo versus the Martian Invasion, Robbery of the Mummies of Guanajuato, and then the 3 Champions of Justice films. I love the Champions of Justice films. They're the Avengers of luchadors.
And the thing that surprised me the most was like the second one. Can't remember what it's called. Is it The Return of the Champions of Justice? I can't speak Spanish, so I don't have the Spanish title. It's like Godfather 2 or The Dark Knight. It's better than the original.
Wow.
So I think the first one, it's good and it's engaging, and you like seeing the big three together, working together. But it feels like the movie was shot in a rush, and it doesn't seem to have quite the same production value as the second one has.
Okay.
Surprisingly, also, the third one builds on that. How often is it that you have a trilogy where each movie builds on what came before but surpasses it? And even though the movies start out pretty humble, they contain imaginative, great ideas, but they're obviously limited budget. I don't know that much about the production, but it seems like the enthusiasm built on each one of those movies. And the level of surreal, imaginative villains and concepts were great. One thing that we haven't mentioned is the supporting casts in these movies.
Oh, yeah.
Like the women, the villains, the micro wrestlers. In some other films, I would say that the ladies were being exploited for their looks, or the micro wrestlers were being exploited because they're little. But that's not how it feels when you watch these movies. Like, they're full characters, and they aren't there for laughs. They're there for whatever their motivation is. And so I think on that level, I was really impressed.
I wonder how much of that goes back to the origin of this stuff, the Lucha Libre traditions, with having women wrestlers, with having micros or minis. The only thing that we don't really see carry over are the exoticos. And I don't know how much you know about Lucha Libre overall. I know that you've got a passing knowledge of pro wrestling just from hanging out with me and, growing up in the 80s. But with Lucha Libre, there's Technicos and Rudos. Technicos are the heroes, Rudos are the villains. You've got the minis, and then you've got exoticos, which are usually very flamboyant, over the top, maybe homosexual or presenting that way, that kind of stereotypical drag queeny kind of persona. And you don't really see a lot of exoticos in luchador films. Don't know why. Maybe it's time. Who knows? I know there was a documentary not too long ago, I think it was called Cassandro, about one of these exotico performers. And they're just as good. It's all about the athleticism and what they can do and the characters and the charisma. And I think the minis are treated with just the same amount of respect. Yeah, they might be the villains most times, but, you know, they're not villains because they're little. They just happen to be in the role of the villains, like the Champions of Justice, where they're all sent out to beat up our heroes, our technicos, and they have the strength and the powers of the bigger wrestlers. I love those sequences, and it's just wonderful and fun to watch and get lost in. And I think some of it does carry over from the Lucha Libre tradition and history when you see these movies, to see these types of people and characters in these movies.
Now, do you know much about the behind the scenes, the production of these films?
Not as much as I'd like. And that's another issue that I have with trying to learn more about these movies, is that so much of the original source material, any of the behind the scenes, documentaries and all that, it's all in Spanish. If it exists at all, it's all in Spanish. And there are very few English language primary sources that I've been able to find over the years. There have been a couple of really good books. I own both of them that have come out over the years. So I don't really know as much about the production as I'd like. I know a little bit more about the general history of people like Santo, who started as a pro wrestler, and then there's a comic book about Santo before he made the leap to film. So he already, you know, you talk about superhero tropes in these films. He was already doing the superhero thing with the comic book.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Have you seen the comic books by Jose Guadalupe Cruz of Santo?
I've seen some of, I don't own any, but I've seen like stuff online.
From what I've read, I guess before that, Santo was a bit of a rudo.
Yeah.
And that it was those comic books that kind of put him in the technico side of things. Mm-hmm. It seems like, and I don't know, but it seems like that really led to the Lucha Libre films of making Santo the Superman of Mexico in a way.
You know, it's funny you call him the Superman, because you reached out to me and I can't remember, was it you that had this observation or one of your children who said the Santo seemed like the Buckaroo Banzai?
Yeah. My oldest son, Emmett, I showed both of my sons the beginning of Santo versus the Martian invasion. And they only watched like 15 minutes of it before they had to go do something else. But Emmett, who's in his 20s, was like, you know, he's like Buckaroo Banzai. He is who he is, and he's a wrestler, but he also has friends who are scientists and detectives, and he has his own lab, and he's brought in to help solve these huge problems and crises, just like Buckaroo Banzai was.
And I wanted to bring that up. I love that as an observation, because when I've had people like Frank Childener, an author and friend of the show, on to talk about these movies, he's compared Santo to Superman like you just did. He's compared Blue Demon to Batman, and Mil Máscara is kind of like the Man of Bronze, who's a Doc Savage type character. I always thought that was a great analogy, but I really like the Buckaroo Banzai, especially something like Champions of Justice, where you've got like an ensemble. Buckaroo Banzai and the Hong Kong Cavaliers of luchadors, you know?
Yeah.
Also, listeners, shout out to Matt, who has made sure his 20-year-old son knows who Buckaroo Banzai is. Big props. Parenting win.
What kind of Gen X dad would I be if they didn't know what Buckaroo Banzai was? To the whole superhero analogy for the luchadors, it's amazing in the sense that these movies are sort of like the serials from the 30s and 40s. Like it reminds me of the Lone Ranger or early Batman. It reminds me of the Fleischer animated Superman, in the way that you have these super villains versus our hero who has to save the day. But it also, these movies were made in a time where you had Euro spy flicks and James Bond, and you have that fusion in these movies where, on the one hand, Santo, Blue Demon, and Mil, they're super cool, driving these exotic convertibles with a really attractive woman on their side, having a good time. But then you flip the script, and all of a sudden they're fighting some evil, mad scientist and his very jacked and buff zombies who are trying to plan to take over the world. It's just this really cool fusion that happened, it seems like, only in Mexico.
Yeah, there's no... Only in Mexico. See, that would be the documentary that us Americans would need to make about these movies. Yeah, I don't know this happens anywhere else. Italy did kind of dip a little bit into the costumed spy thing with like Argo Man and a few of the others, Danger Diabolique and things like that, but not to this extent. And they didn't start with wrestlers to begin with. Argo Man's an actor, and he's Roger Brown. He's not a wrestler, he's an actor. Whereas with the luchador films, you've got real life wrestlers doing what they do, playing who they play in the ring, who they are in real life when they're on public. Santo was buried with his mask on. I mean, for crying out loud. There is a little bit of footage, a TV interview that Santo did toward the end of his life, where the camera did not get turned off when he took his mask off. So there is an image of what his face looks like. There's been questions, some controversy. Did he mean to do that? Because he knew he was towards the end of his life anyway. Wasn't an accident. Nobody really knows. I don't think we really ever found out what Blue Demon looks like. I have no idea what Mamoscurus looks like. And that's fine. That's the luchador way, and I don't want to know. These are the characters for me. And it exists to this day, even with some of the more popular luchadors. You don't know what they look like because they won't take their masks on, even if they're working for the WWE or AEW or these big promotions. There are some luchadors, you go to their Wikipedia entry, and it doesn't have their real name because they've never released it. The mystery is still there. It's still the magic. The character is the character. I love that world, and
I think a lot of people let their cultural biases or their cinematic snobbery or theatrical high notions get in the way of something like this.
Yeah.
But if you look at luchadors and lucha libre cinema and even wrestling, like, it is like theater.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There is a gravitas, there's a performance, there's a story being told, and it connects with people. Like, I know this sounds nerdy and a stretch, but when you think of, theater in the round, doing Shakespeare, and lucha libre, there are commonalities. You have heroes and villains, you have twists and turns, and you have an audience rooting for the characters they identify with. So I know that sounds like a stretch. There's a connection there, and we're all hardwired to love stories.
Yeah,
and to connect to heroes and see villains, but maybe see the motivations of why someone's a villain. And that's the reason, cinema is universal. And I think that people who love stories and love movies should really give the Lucha Libre films an opportunity to reach them, because there's a lot of fun there to be had. And if you're not allowing yourself to have that fun, you're missing the fiesta.
So a couple of thoughts. I now want to see a Shakespeare adaptation done by luchadors. I think that would be a lot of fun to see. I'm not sure which one yet, not Romeo and Juliet or any of the big, but something. I don't know, if like a Henry V or a Macbeth or something. I don't know, something. As
in the park. Lucha Libre, Shakespeare in the Park.
Oh,
I'm there.
I love this so much. I love this so much. You said earlier that these films have something for everybody, and you're right. It is a kiddie adventure. Sure. The ones that we talk about the most have monsters. Not all of them, but a lot of them have monsters. You do have the romantic relationships. You have some, like with the Blue Demon movies, he's usually adopted a child. So there's the father-son relationship and dynamic. You've got, a lot of times, the scene in the dance club. So you've got a musical number. So you've got all this stuff going on in these movies. It's not just a bunch of wrestling, although, and I've said this before on the show, a lot of the films that show wrestling matches as part of the film's runtime, sure, you might look at it as if they're trying to pad the runtime. But also a lot of times that's the only way these wrestling matches exist on film anymore, because they didn't always get taped. They didn't always get filmed. A lot of times, if you wanted to see a wrestling match and you didn't own a television and you didn't watch it live, the only place you're going to see a wrestling match is in the middle of a Santo movie. And it's a legit wrestling match most of the time. Sometimes it's staged for the film, where you've got somebody taking shots at the wrestlers from a sniper position, and then the wrestlers have to deal with that too. But a lot of these wrestling matches that you see in the films are just actual matches that they happen to have footage for, and they cut it into the story. And I love that too, because now you're getting wrestling history and Lucha Libre history as well. So you've got all this stuff going on in these movies. You mentioned the big hulking zombies.
Yeah.
The Mummies of Guanajuato films are pretty special. You texted me the other day, or sent me a message the other day. The Mummies of Guanajuato are real. It's like, yeah, I know. It's like a big thing there. It's so cool. I want to go down and check those exhibits out. They're set up to look like museums, and you can walk in and see this stuff. I would love to check it out just for the history and archaeology of it. But the mummies of Mexican history became kind of like one of their stock monsters. And the way they're presented, I've heard some people refer to them as being presented more as zombies versus mummies. I'm not going to get into the zombie undead classification stuff right now. But the Mummies of Guanajuato, those movies are fantastic. And the list that you gave me only has one of them on there. So if you're looking for more, any of the Mummies of Guanajuato films, highly recommend.
And I saw that there was another Mummy of Guanajuato that has the big three in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be next on my list. Although one thing I would say is that, back to your point of these great movies not being more available, is that the problem I keep running into is I can find a lot of them. There's a lot of Spanish-speaking streaming services now.
Yeah.
The problem is for someone like me who doesn't speak Spanish, and I understand a little bit, but not much, a lot of them aren't available with English subtitles.
Right.
And I know that's a first world problem, and a lot of these movies, I think, I probably could watch them and not need to know exactly what the language means to enjoy them. And I probably need to take that leap and just dive in. Who knows? By the end of this, maybe I'll be learning Spanish just to get more out of these great movies.
I've often joked that I want to do like a Duolingo or one of these other language, Rosetta Stone software packages to learn Spanish just so I can watch luchador movies. And then that's quickly followed up with, then I want to learn Japanese so I can watch the kaiju films in their original language. But it seems like an awful lot of work. And like you said, that's very first world problems. The Mexican filmmakers are under no obligation to make sure that us gringos up here can watch these movies. You do you, and I'll settle for the fan subtitled projects that sometimes have decent translations. I do own a few luchador movies on disc, physical media, that I thought I was getting a great deal on when I found them on Amazon for like $3. I'm like, oh, that's great. But it turns out there's no subtitle or English track on it. So I'm sitting there watching, and it's like, well, I kind of know what's going on, but I'd like to know more.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you mentioned kaiju movies.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like Mexican cinema is similar to Japanese cinema in the sense that maybe it's those cultures. They have a higher bar for suspension of disbelief. In both kaiju movies and these movies, they aren't necessarily realistic, but you're in for the fantasy. Like, you can see past the wires, or you can see past some weird melting effects of a person covered in green goo as they dissolve away. Like, maybe there's a higher level of acceptance of things that are theatrical, maybe, than we're accustomed to. Because when I think about it, I'm thinking, kaiju movies, lucha libre movies, both stretch my imagination. They give me something that I would never expect. And are they the most realistic special effects? No, but the movies still work. There's still a magic to them. Almost a homemade quality,
Yeah. I don't know what that is. I see where you're coming from. I know that a lot of the movies of the era, like the low-budget drive-in B-movie fare here in the States, domestically did have some of the sillier effects and that sort of thing. But not to the extent. I think with Mexican and Japanese cinema, you're right. There is a higher level of willing disbelief that you have to kind of go into these movies with.
I was going to say, maybe you're hitting the nail on the head there, in the sense that the low-budget movies in this country were B movies. They ran after the big budget A movie. Whereas in Mexico, the Lucha Libre films, they may have been B movies because they're low budget, but they didn't run second tier. Same with kaiju movies in Japan. Budget-wise, effects-wise, they may have been what we consider a B movie, but I think they had first runs.
Yeah.
And so maybe they're held in a different prestige because of that. And I know that you and I fight the good fight to get more attention for B movies to be appreciated for the artistry and the entertainment that they are. So I don't know. Maybe there's something there.
I want to ask you about Santo versus the Martian Invasion.
Yes.
How Plan 9 from outer space can you get?
I thought it was better than Plan 9 from Outer Space.
I love Plan 9 from Outer Space, but I'm with you there too, I think.
I enjoy Plan 9 for what it is. And Santo versus the Martian invasion, when I watched it, I was surprised it was made in 67 because it looks like it was made in 57.
Yeah.
But I thought it was great. And even though even the dress, like even the way the Martians were dressed and their costumes and their spaceships looked very 1950s, very 50s.
Yeah.
And in the black and white, I don't know. I think the production value was higher than Plan 9, and I found the story more fun.
I love Plan 9 from Outer Space. I really do. It's one of my favorite Ed Wood films. It's not my absolute favorite, but it's right there near the top tier. But there is something about Santo versus the Martian invasion that does hit differently for me, and I do love it just a little bit more. It does have a little bit more of a retro feel, and I don't know where that comes from. And I don't know if it's Mexican pop culture kind of following in the wake of American pop culture at the time or what. Not sure what that's about. And I know that they wanted to show off the women in their costumes and the men too, the men Martians. They're supposed to be Greek gods. I mean, they're modeled after the Greek gods. So they're supposed to look, a certain way, very classical kind of beauty look. So I'm not sure.
The hottest Martians I've ever seen. The hottest Martians I've ever seen in any movie ever.
You have seen a handful now. Do you like them in black and white or do you like them in color?
Yeah, I've only seen one in black and white.
Yeah.
The other 5 have all been in color. I feel like the Lucha Libre movies work really well in that saturated kind of Technicolor look of the 60s. Just the flamboyance of it and the masks and all that. It seems like it works really well in color. But I will say that Santo versus the Martian Invaders felt more like a classic film in black and white. So I think it's too early to say what I like better. I've certainly enjoyed them all. I'll probably need to watch more early black and white Lucha Libre movies before I'll give you that verdict.
Okay. I prefer them in color as well. I feel like that world works better in that weird, not quite Technicolor, but pretty garish at times color.
Yeah.
When you said saturated, I think that's a great way to put it as well. Plus, you get to see the silver mask in silver and the blue demon in blue. I do like that as well. But there is something about the black and white ones. And the movie that we talked about last week here on the show, the very first Santo movie, it's a black and white film. And to kind of go back to something you brought up earlier about how Santo was really a rudo to begin with, in that first Santo film, he gets brainwashed by a mad scientist. So he is on the side of the villains through at least half of the movie until another luchador gives him a serum to recover. And now suddenly he's a good guy. So you get, maybe that was the transition. He started as the bad guy at the beginning of the movie. And then at the end, he's the hero that the police are all like, yeah, come on out to the crime scene, buddy. Let's look at this together,
Well, and that's one thing I did love about Santo and Blue Demon versus the Monsters was the fact that, I know it's a spoiler, Blue Devil gets cloned. There's an evil clone of him that takes on Santo. I was floored by that. That was just great.
Well, Santo and Blue Demon, they were rivals. Their children definitely rivals in the ring. And I don't know where Mel Vasquez really kind of stood in all of that. I know that American wrestlers did not like working with him. The story that I've always heard is that he refused to sell for American wrestlers, that he didn't want to look weak. At least that's what the American wrestlers say. His response was, well, I'm not going to do the move. I'm not going to sell unless I do the move right to begin with. So you do it right, I'll react. You don't do it right, I'm not going to work with you. So I don't know. But he's in the he's in the WWE Hall of Fame, as is Santo. I don't know if Blue Demon is, but he should be.
Right, for sure. It does seem like the rivalry and some tension definitely existed between Blue Demon and Santo. I think there was some jealousy there on Blue Demon's part. On Mill's part, I noticed that he's in the first of the Champions of Justice, but he isn't in the following ones. And I don't know if that is a sign of some kind of issue between him and Blue Demon. I haven't read anything like that. I don't know if it was an issue of being able to afford them both, it being as big as they were. I mean, I guess the bottom line is we're lucky to have the movies that we have with all of them.
Well, I think it's important to remember, too, that they all had wrestling careers going at the same time.
Right.
So they may have been on tour. They may have been nursing. Sure. They may have just been available for whatever reason. Or they couldn't get out of their contract at the time. The promotion had plans for them and didn't want them going away for 6 weeks or 4 weeks, or in the case of some of these, it seems like maybe a couple of days to shoot a movie. You know?
Yeah, that's a great point.
So they all were still wrestlers at the time too. So they had their careers going. They were all multi-time champions. And man, to be able to see some of their original matches, just watching the films for that is amazing to me.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that they were real wrestlers, but they also had film careers, still wows me.
And I know that, like in the 80s, we had, what was that, Hulk Hogan movie, No Holds Barred. And we had Ready to Rumble with David Arquette and one of the Baldwin brothers. That was in the 90s at some point. So we've had some wrestling movies with real wrestlers in it, portraying real wrestlers, but not to this extent. And I know we've got the crossover stars like John Cena and The Rock and all them doing movies and all. But
and Dave Bautista and all three guys, I think all three guys are really entertaining, and it's fun to see them cross over. But it's not the same. It's not the same as luchadors because, there's power to the mask and not seeing the face underneath.
Yeah,
that gives you the fact that you're only seeing Batman. You're not seeing Bruce Wayne.
Exactly. I was doing a little bit of research about like the history of luchador masks and how that kind of became a thing. And the myth is that, masks have always been part of Mexican culture, and it goes all the way back to the Aztecs. And while there may have been some of that, masked wrestling was kind of a fluke. It wasn't something that was created by Mexican culture. It was something that was accidentally done by an American wrestler who was kind of on his way out, wasn't really drawing a lot, put on a mask, pretended to be the masked Marvel, and suddenly everybody's very interested in him again. And the Mexican wrestling promotions saw that, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, let's do that. And that fascinates me too, that the mythology of like Lucha Libre and Luchador and the masks and all that even has what they would refer to in wrestling terms a kayfabe background or history. That's all part of the story, and we're all in on it, but we don't care. We love it anyway. And that's the world again, the reality of these movies is that, yeah, we know. It's just a dude in the mask, but we don't care, man. It's the mask, that's what's important. And I love that that's what we get in these films, and we get these monsters, and oh man, just suddenly I'm thinking about the Frankenstein with the Fu Manchu mustache. Did you get to see the one with that?
Does he have a Fu Manchu mustache in Versus the Monsters? Frankenstein?
Yes. He pulls up in the car and he's got the Fu Manchu.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
And at that point, we don't care. We're all in. We're just along for this wonderful ride.
The vampire, too. I don't know, El Vampiro in his top hat and his leaping bat-like entry to attack was cool, too. I was blown away by that. Although I think the thing that really got my attention was the Cyclops.
Yes. Yeah.
The man in the suit with the big glowing eye. The whole time I was thinking my inner 12-year-old is screaming, why didn't I find these movies when I was a kid?
Right?
I would have been jumping off the couch.
I'm so jealous when I talk to somebody, especially when we talk about luchador movies here on the show. Oh yeah, I grew up watching these movies, or I just fell in love with them when I was 7 years old and my dad showed me this. I'm like, oh man, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. If I had a time machine and I could go back in time, sure, kill Hitler, whatever. All the stuff that I would want to do with a time machine is all movie related. And one of them would be sitting little Derek down in front of, a Santo movie or a Blue Demon movie. And then maybe later on telling him to take some Spanish classes in high school so he could understand them a little bit more later. But
right.
Man, they're all movie related. I would love to be able to go back and watch these for the first time as a kid and just feeling that childlike sense of wonder and awe watching Blue Demon beat up a Wolfman.
Can you imagine what it must have been like in those theaters when those movies came out for the first time? Packed houses with families and kids, and all of a sudden your favorite luchador is taking on the Wolfman.
Yeah.
It must have been a riot.
Yeah. There are a couple of luchador movies where the women are the lead, but I will unfortunately have to temper any enthusiasm on those. I love them, but in most cases, the women were cast as actresses as opposed to wrestlers. And the wrestling is done by masked women that kind of look like the actresses. It's because they got wrestlers to do it for whatever reason. They didn't cast wrestling women in most of the women leads in these movies, but they're still fun. So I would recommend them. There's a couple of them out there that I would recommend, but most of the time it's a boys club.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it was something to do with wanting the delivery and the look of the actress, but having to do stunts, then they had wrestlers double them. Like I was reading that almost all of these movies, the wrestlers did their own stunts.
Yeah.
And that even Blue Demon was injured on a movie that took him out for quite a while to recover. Maybe that kind of goes back to these being B movies and sort of guerrilla productions.
Yeah. Which is too bad.
And and after I read that and then watching more of them, I was just like holding my breath. I can't imagine any actor doing this except maybe Tom Cruise with a bunch of other, backup safety stuff in place. There was none of that in these movies.
There's none of that. And there's wrestling happening outside of a wrestling ring. Not that the wrestling ring is soft.
Right.
It might have a little bit of padding here and there, but it's still a hard surface. But you've got people doing suplexes and body throws and all that on hard concrete or on a dirt road somewhere. Like, this is not soft. This doesn't feel good, I'm sure. I don't want to take a bump in a wrestling ring, let alone in my driveway.
Yeah. Yeah, some of those, I almost want to call them bouts. Like, when the heroes engage the villains and they're fighting like on top of gravel and they're taking falls and spills, and it just makes my elbows and knees hurt looking at it.
Yeah. What did you think of the music in some of these?
Loved the music.
Yes.
Loved the music. It certainly sounds very period of that time, like it's very up tempo. It's got a bit of funk to it. Very engaging. Like, do you know much about the music that went into these films?
I wish I did. And I wish a lot of it was available, just to download or listen to on CD or whatever. Because you know me, I'm a film score collector. I would love to get my hands on some of this stuff. I wish I knew more about it.
The beginning of all the Champions of Justice movies, when they're riding in on motorcycles.
Oh, yeah.
And the soundtrack is just banging. It's amazing. Like, I could just watch that over and over and over again all day long. Like that, it's like the essence of cool in a way, Like,
yeah,
it's like Easy Rider meets the Avengers. It was just amazing. It's easy to geek out on.
And the first Champions of Justice movie, that's the scene I keep going back to in my head. It's just them on the motorcycles and 5 to 10 minutes of close-ups with the name of the wrestler underneath it, and you get to see all their masks in their glory, and the assassin doctor and Mill and all these others. Another one of my favorite guys, and I don't know if you've seen him yet. His name's Tianablis. Big gold mask with a black delta on his face.
Yeah, I think he's in the second and third Champions of Justice movies.
I love that look.
Yeah.
There's something about that guy, and he's a big hulking dude.
Yeah.
Something about him. And his son is now wrestling as well, I believe, under that mask. And I've seen some matches of his on like CMLL Wrestling back when years ago when I had access to a Spanish language channel. I literally had a Spanish language channel, and I would DVR record all the CMLL matches. Had no idea what they were saying, but I would watch them anyway because they're just fun to watch. The energy is just insane. And they're just built different, man. They're just built different than most American wrestlers. Like, you look at Santo and you look at Blue Demon, and they're not like the bodybuilder type. They're barrel-chested. They're thick.
Yeah, it's sort of like strongman versus bodybuilder. Like, they look like strongmen.
Yeah. And a lot of luchador matches, a lot of traditional lucha libre, I mean, they go like a good half hour. It's 2 out of 3 falls. Your matches aren't over in 10 minutes. You got to go. So their conditioning is insane.
And I was surprised and kind of blown away by, and I know it's funny, but like, there's almost a grace or a gymnastic quality about lucha libre matches that I don't really see in American pro wrestling.
Yeah, I agree with you there too. Like I said, I watch a lot of pro wrestling. Beth and I watch AEW programming a lot. We're huge fans of AEW. And they have a lot of the smaller guys. They have a handful of luchadors, legitimate mask-wearing luchadors on the roster. And those matches are always the most fun because they're always flipping and dipping and diving and jumping off things. And they have that grace. And Beth, because when she was a kid, she did gymnastics. She's like, I bet there's gymnastics training in their background. I bet they did gymnastics in school. Or, was it like how Russia was back in the day when a kid showed any kind of aptitude in any sport and suddenly that's all the state government had you do so that you could go win the Olympics for them? Was it like that down in Mexico? Did they have, okay, well, you have an aptitude for gymnastics, so that's what you're doing. And they just got to the point where they could just fly. And even somebody built like a Santo or a Blue Demon, when you see them jump off the turnbuckle or off a car or whatever, they don't look like they should be able to move that way. But they do. And it's amazing. And they did their own stunts. And there is no wires. It's awesome.
It brings that circus climax back to me.
Yes.
In the final film of the Champions of Justice.
Yes.
How bananas was that?
That was insane. And I love it. Oh, I love it so much. And sure, you had wrestlers in front of the camera. But the people making these movies, they just were making movies. I was looking a little bit. We were talking just now, and you were like, do you know anything about the guys who did the music? And I don't. But I look up somebody like Gustavo Cesar Carrion, who did some of the luchador movies, and his filmography, 365 movies listed for composer.
Wow.
He did a lot of Mexican cinema, and this certainly wasn't all luchador stuff. I mean, some of it was. But some of it's drama, some of it's historical stuff, some of it's romance. And some of it's Santo Blue Demon versus Dr. Frankenstein. So,
I noticed that too with some of the directors too. Like Federico Curiel. Mm-hmm. He directed like 60, 70 movies, and only like half of them are Lucha Libre films. And he goes from that golden era of Mexican cinema all the way up. And there's a lot of talented people involved. And the movie nerd in me wishes that somebody would put together a really good database that's in multiple languages that kind of tells us these backstories, because they're there. That like there's family history and cinematic history, and I would just love for a way to access it, because on the one hand, it's fun to have to go on a treasure hunt online to figure out more about Lucha Libre films and the wrestlers and the filmmakers. But it's hard. Like it's not in any one place clearly. There's not a really good online guide to these movies. I even broke down recently and bought The Mexican Masked Wrestler and Monster Filmography by Robert Michael Bob Cotter, because I just couldn't find stuff online the way I wanted to.
I was about to recommend that book, actually. That's one of the books that I own. And I've met Bob Cotter. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He did pass away. And actually, I own a few lobby cards from luchador films, and I bought them from him at a Monster Bash years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
He loved them. He loved them. And for anybody who went to Monster Bash, Bob Cotter was the guy who was dressed like the Night Stalker, the 70s TV show, Kolchak. So that was him. And like I said, he's no longer with us, unfortunately, but this book is probably the best book, the best resource I've found so far.
It seems to be available anywhere books are sold too. For people out there who want to dive into this history and know more. I've only read maybe a third of it so far, but I think you're right. It's a great resource as I continue my dive into the mat.
The other book that I would recommend is called Mexploitation Cinema, A Critical History of Mexican Vampire Wrestler, Ape Man, and Similar Films, 1957 and 1977, by Doyle Green. This one, it's not just about the luchador stuff, and most of the luchador material is Santo-centric, but it does talk about, and it really dives into what genre cinema was like during that time. And to be fair, I love the other genre stuff too. Brainiac is fantastic. The various, I can't pronounce it because I can't roll my R's, but the La Lorna films that they did down there were great. Phantom of the Convent is fantastic. There's some really good horror movies and gothic Mexican films that came out around the same time that used a lot of the same people behind the camera. But
have you dived into the Nostradamus films at all? Mexico, that were kind of like the pre-Lucha Libre films, kind of?
A little bit. I have shown them on the stream, in fact, and I do need to wrap up here, but I do want to wrap up by saying, pay attention to the Twitch stream, because I'm going to be showing nothing but luchador movies, and I'm going to set it up to run 24/7, and I'm going to set up a good 12-hour block of films. If you need more luchadors in your life, twitch.tv/MonsterKidRadio. I'll do luchador movies for now, and then I'll drop some of the Nostradamus films into it maybe next month.
Oh man, I know where I'm going to watch some Lucha Libre now. I'm going to the Twitch.
There you go.
Join me, Monster Kids. Let's watch some luchadors together.
All right. Well, like I said, I do need to start wrapping up. I need to go pick up my wife from her luchadors training, and okay, that actually would be terrifying. Don't tell her I said that. But yeah, I do need to take off here soon. I do need to wrap this up. Before we wrap up, Matt, are there any final thoughts you have about your journey so far?
It's been amazing and surreal and pulpy and campy in the very best ways of those words. And I can't wait to continue this exploration of films from south of the border.
See, that's what I love about Monster Kid Radio, is when I am able to suggest, I'm not going to say convince or trick or force, but when I can suggest somebody explore a few other movies out there that I suspect they're really going to love, that makes me happy. So that's awesome to hear. Listeners, check out the archives for previous Lucha da Mayos and check out the movies that we've covered so far. Some of them Matt and I have already talked about. We did talk about Santo versus the Martian Invasion, I believe, with Kenny in the past. Frank Children has been part of those conversations, as well as a handful of other people. Check out those two books that we mentioned. I'll make sure there's links in the show notes for those as well. And we'll have Matt on again in the future. Like I said, he's a Monster Kid Radio regular now, whether he likes it or not.
Oh, I like it.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Monster Kid Radio. Big thanks to Matt for being part of the show again. You know, I always feel weird about asking people who aren't in it the way that we are about coming onto the show multiple times. I'm just grateful to Matt that he wants to play in our sandbox here, and discovering that he's a monster kid at heart, just like the rest of us, just makes my monster kid heart grow a little bit bigger. Not too much that I need to see a doctor, but, you know, my heart is swelling with monster kid happiness or something. I'm losing my track here. Anyway, thanks to Matt, thanks to Kenny, thanks to Mark, and thanks to you for downloading the show and listening to the show, and hopefully sharing the show. Retweet the tweets, or re-X the X's, I suppose. Spread the word on x.com, or share the post on Facebook, like the post on Facebook. We have links to our Facebook and our formerly known as Twitter on our website at monsterkidradio.net. You're also going to find links to our Reddit, our Discord, and our Patreon over there, as well as links to everything that we've talked about here on the show, like that link to the American Cinematheque YouTube video, as well as the book, the Cult Movies book that Captain Billy mentioned. I'll make sure there's links to the two Mexican cinema books that Matt and I talked about as well. So you'll find that there too. And our contact information is there as well.
Have something you'd like to share with Monster Kid Radio? You can email the podcast at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 360-524-2484.
What's coming up next week on the show? Well, we are having Steve Turek and Mark Holmes come back to continue their conversation, their coverage of the German science fiction series from the 1960s that's translated in English to Space Patrol, The Fantastic Adventures of the Spaceship Orion, or something in German. I can't pronounce it. I'm not even going to try. I'll let Steve Turek and Mark Holmes kind of dance around that next week. This is going to be an episode in which Steve Turek is playing guest host, and I know that a lot of y'all really dug Steve and Mark talking about Space Patrol the first time they did it. Check out the archives at monsterkidradio.net or in your various podcast directories out there. Look for episode 651 for part 1 of that conversation, and then catch up with that conversation next week here on the show. What's coming up in 2 weeks? Well, Beth and I are talking about a special episode that she may be spearheading. I'm excited for that conversation. That's going to be fun. I'm not really prepared to tell you what it is yet because I'm still kind of getting my head wrapped around it, but what she and I talked about last night, in fact, sounds really cool, and I think y'all will dig that as well. And then I've got a few other things in the works. Just make sure you stay tuned to Monster Kid Radio or your various podcast directories or catchers, wherever it is you listen to Monster Kid Radio, even if it's history or YouTube. Make sure you stay tuned. Also, make sure you stay tuned to what we've got coming up over at Team Death. That's teamdeath.com. Death is spelled D-E-T-H. The website will be receiving an update or a refresh within the next week or so stay tuned for that. We haven't posted any new YouTube videos to our Team Death YouTube channel, but that may be happening here soon. And I did launch a wrestling channel, and I think a lot of y'all already know that I'm a huge fan of professional wrestling. I think I even mentioned it in the conversation with Matt. I love pro wrestling, and I really like independent pro wrestling. I like looking at indie promotions and checking out what they're up to. And I noticed that there aren't a lot of people really talking about the indie promotions on YouTube. So I am. So check out Suplex Stream. It's a very young YouTube channel, but I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for you to go check it out. Even if you don't watch any of the YouTube videos that have to do with wrestling, even if you don't care about wrestling, well, we can still be friends, but maybe consider giving it a like and subscribe so I can kind of get the YouTube algorithm to think that it's something worthwhile and pushing out to other people. I'd really appreciate it if you'd help me out with that. Suplex Stream, like Monster Kid Radio, is a production of Team Death. Like Beth is about to tell you.
Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death or other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, Monster Kid Rider, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. That's teamdeath.com. Please rate and review Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts.
King Kong is copyright 2024. Billy Venino, you can find it on his EP, Revolver EP. You can find it at billyvenino.mx.bandcamp.com. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. Check out the entire EP. It's got some really cool music on it. And let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Adios.
Entonces soy King Kong.